This is the last in our Masterclass series on IR35, and I'd just like to welcome everyone that's been tuning in for this series since November last year, and of course a warm welcome to anyone that's joined us for the first time today. We aim to share some practical tips, opinion on how to get your organization, even at this very late stage, ready or navigate the journey for IR35. So as I said, welcome to you all. I'd just like to introduce some of our two main speakers today. So I'm incredibly pleased and proud to be joined by a friend of the show, Julia Kermode, who has joined us for our second webinar. Thank you, Julia, and welcome. For those of you who do not know Julia, Julia is CEO and founder of IWORK, which was set up in 2020, which champions independent work and is a really excellent resource for agency workers, temps, gig workers, contractors, freelancers, and the self-employed to better understand the business of working for themselves and also how to navigate some of the legislation. So Julie's a podcaster, a network builder, and a campaigner. In addition to being a campaigner, I think it's fair to say, Julie, that you're an executor. And what I mean by that is that you make things happen and you affect real change through your advocacy. And for anyone that's been familiar with Julia's previous life as CEO of the FCSA, the umbrella company, the umbrella regulatory body, Julia has done sterling work in bringing some really excellent attention to the sector. So Julia, a warm welcome to you and really looking forward to this today. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm also really pleased to be joined by Gareth Walls. Gareth is also a friend of CXE, but Gareth is also our external counsel, and he is a partner and head of the NL Goodbody Employment and Incentive Teams based out of Belfast, Northern Ireland, so a fellow Northern Irishman. So Gareth and I know each other well. Unfortunately, Gareth has to speak with me regularly about employment-related matters, but it's needless to say that Gareth is an expert in his field of employment law. He's significant experience in corporate immigration, redundancy, restructuring, 2P. And Gareth is also, in addition to all those talents, an accomplished commercial litigator with particular emphasis on discrimination within the employment law context. And more recently, he's been a sought after speaker on employment issues relating to IR35, COVID, stroke furlough, and the Modern Slavery Act. So Gareth, a warm welcome to you. And again, thanks so much for your participation today. I am our host. My name is Conor Heaney. I'm the Managing Director here at CXE Global EMEA. So less said about me, the better. And I think we'll just launch into it. So what we're hoping to cover today, folks, we've got a number of topics that we're going to cover. So I guess we're going to restate the problem or the issue. What is IR35? We're going to look at some of the issues that might exist and do exist for the end user, fee payers, recruiters, people in the supply chain, companies in the supply chain, and the penalties and risks if you as an organization or as a fee payer don't get this right. What categories of workers does this impact? There's some confusion within the sector at the moment. You know, are sole traders, for example, in scope for this, umbrella companies. HMRC, the UK tax authorities, for those of you that are joining from overseas, have promised a soft landing, and we're posing the question, is this to be believed? Not that we don't believe our government or their authorities for that matter, but I thought we'd pose the question nonetheless. Also, blanket approaches, we've seen a number of those. So really what we want to and wish to explore in this topic is, you know, whether that's a policy decision and that's okay, or do organizations that make these blanket approaches need to be worried? And then we'll look at what is reasonable care. And then we will look at, are there opportunities for organizations to utilize umbrella companies? Because umbrella companies sometimes get a bit of stick, unfairly in some cases, fairly in others, but we want to really explore that opportunity further. And then something that has generated a lot of debate, certainly on the webinars to date, but also within the wider contingent workforce world in the UK is, you know, is statement of work a panacea for helping organizations move or keep contractors outside IR35? So the question we're posing here is whether it's a solution or a risk. And if I may, Conor Lavelle is our marketing person for Europe, and he's going to be running our chat function. We've just got some housekeeping in the next slide. So if you could do the courtesy of just muting your lines, please, folks. If you could address questions through the chat function, Connor will collate them. If it's a really burning question, we'll certainly break into our flow and do our best to answer that. And we will be recording the session. So if you're not comfortable with that, well, you might not want to stay on, but please do otherwise. So Connor, if we could just go back to the discussion points. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and of course, a warm welcome. So Gareth, even at this late stage, as everyone or most people on the call or webinar will know, IR35 in its current form is coming live on the 6th of April, not too far away. But even at this late stage, we're still getting inquiries from, pretty large enterprises saying, "What the hell is IR35?" And by the way, these are companies in the UK, not overseas. What is IR35? What the hell do we need to do? When do we need to do it by? If we start, does that afford us some level of protection, even if we don't get everything done by 6th of April? So, Gareth, could you just give us? I'm sorry, and there's a caveat before I ask you the question. Even though Gareth is a solicitor and lawyer, guys, this is his opinion only. His advice is not binding in any way, nor should it be construed as such. So that's our disclaimer and caveat for Gareth. But Gareth, what the hell is IR35 in the private sector? And can we offer companies some hope that are just beginning the journey of starting? And if you would mind taking that one. Thanks, Gareth.
Sure. Thank you very much, Connor, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to IR35. It's not the most exciting subject in the world. Tax and employment issues never are, but nevertheless, it's a critically important one, and in a way, it's come through by stealth. And I say that largely because IR35 for the private sector really should have been introduced this time last year. But as a consequence of COVID, the UK government, quite rightly, has been focused on other things. So the introduction for IR35 in the private sector was postponed a year, and it's in on the 6th of April 2021. That in itself should mean that all parties, all businesses should be fully aware of IR35 in the private sector, what it means. But as Connor states, and he's quite right, most entities out there have buried their head in the sand in this. They weren't ready for it in 2020, and they have not used 2020 to 2021 well in this regard. The vast majority of clients we're working with are coming to us very late to the party. And yes, there are certain things we can do, but time is against us. Stepping back just for a second, what actually is IR35? Again, it's nothing new. It's an extension of UK tax legislation, EDIPA, Income Tax Earnings and Pensions Act, 2003. So the core legislation has been with us for some time. IR35 is an extension of that. It's been in the public sector, odds in and out for 3-4 years, and they're largely through that. And now it's coming into the private sector, and its purpose really is to address those entities who are considered, for example, a single person corporate vehicle. They are individuals who provide a service to a third party, almost exclusively to a third party. We'll come to that later. And instead of wanting to be taxed as an employee or worker, they have instead set up as a limited company to avail of lower corporation tax rates. So consequently, the revenue ultimately is not recovering as much tax as they might properly from this source of work. So it has all sorts of lovely titles, all sorts of different approaches. We'll talk about PSCs, personal service companies, etc. But when you boil it all down, this is the UK revenue seeking to ensure that the correct amount of tax is paid by an individual stroke organization providing services to a third party. And that's what we're left with, and that's what we're looking at. We will come to talk to some of the problems later on these questions. So that's probably that's all I probably want to say in the initial introduction for that one, Connor.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. And Gareth, I think it's fair to say that there's probably significant holes in the legislation, right? Because essentially what it's saying, in my view anyway, is that you're not going to be taxed as an employee with none of the rights that go with it, assuming that a worker is deemed inside IR35, right? To me,
Yeah.
that's fundamental problem number one, just on a conceptual basis, right? But then number two is essentially, for the audience that aren't aware of this, they're moving the responsibility for determining the worker's tax status onto the end user in essence. And the reason why that is problematic is because the end user is essentially saying, how the hell do we do this? What is the mechanism? What is the means? What is the test? And how do we do it right without getting ourselves sued or fined?
Yeah, look, completely agree. I would say there are four main problems with this, which I'll talk to. For the end users, for the individuals themselves, there's an administrative burden, because the burden has now shifted completely away from the personal service company to make its own off-payroll determination and annual statement to HMRC, and that is passed now to effectively the user of the service. And with that passage of responsibility comes the potential for penalties, and we'll talk to the penalties later. There's the pure financial burden, in the sense that employers' NICs now will be factored into this. And there is a much bigger issue, I think, and as an employment lawyer, I would focus on this, but this is that individuals under the microscope of this analysis will now have a greater ability to argue employee status. They would never have considered themselves an employee before. They're paying tax as a small corporate. They are reporting through to HMRC in relation to non-employee status. But you can see that if, because of this development of IR35, an organization is saying, well, I'm being taxed, or I'm expected to be taxed, or one outflow of this is that I will be taxed now as a worker through PAYE payroll as opposed to small corporate, then do I not get any of the benefits of employment status as well? Or moreover, where we are in a gray area now, it is no longer a binary determination. What does that actually mean for status? And this is where I think the nub of the problem arises. For those entities that are coming to us, they will say, look, for the last year and a half, they've been tortured by their accountancy firms. They've been pushing IR35 for quite some time. There's almost a total vacuum from the legal side. And yet, where both parties, accountancy, tax side, legal side, agree, is that this is a tool which is to be focused on the determination of status. What is an employee? What is a worker? Now, from the pure tax side, HMRC have created the CEST tool, and even they acknowledge that it is completely fallible. Totally, well, not totally unreliable, they haven't gone that far, but it is unreliable in and of itself. They do say, if anybody's worked through some of the analyses, that whatever responses churned out, the HMRC will stand over it for a period of time. That is fine. But what that does not do is ever address what is an employee from the legal side, because the tests are different and there are a whole range of them, but one of them, which is the most significant, is mutuality of obligation. It is the rate of substitution, it is control, and those legal tests are either not addressed at all in HMRC tax side, or they are addressed in, they pay lip service to it only. So consequently, you can see going forward, no matter what happens on the 6th of April, there will be a great division of approach between, well, if I'm classed as an employee stroke IR35 relevant for the purposes of HMRC and tax, does that change my legal status? And because there has been a lot of talk on this from accountancy and tax and almost none from the lawyers, I have an awful lot of sympathy for business end users out there that are really quite fearful of what this may mean for how they conduct business going forward. So those are the administrative and the conceptual problems. But deal also with ultimate penalties. as and when they fall due. And those, I think I'll just deal with them now, fall into 3 categories. We know that the burden is now passed away from the PSC to us as end users, if you like. In making your determination and your assessment, and there's a process to that, and if we haven't frankly started that process now, we're in trouble. But if we have gone through the process and shown a degree of these are legal terms, HMRC quoting, willful neglect in making the determination or deliberate non-compliance, then HMRC has authority to recover both unpaid tax and issue a penalty fine. Penalty fine is based on 3 scales. 1, 30% of the unpaid taxes if there's negligence or carelessness. 2, 70% of unpaid taxes if the company knew or ought reasonably to have known that the relationship falls within IR35 but chooses to ignore that. And then 100% of unpaid taxes, so this is effectively double recovery or double penalty, 100% if the company seeks to actually hide IR35 status. So in short, lots of commercial issues, administrative issues, but also potential financial penalties, negative PR that comes with this if and when we get there.
My word. I mean, we're obviously familiar with this. You know, yourself, Gareth, Julia, companies like CXC, we're at the forefront of this. And Julia, I'm going to come on to you in a very short minute. But if only more organizations were aware of this penalty regime, you know, if HMRC were shouting this from the rooftops, it might encourage companies to get their affairs in order that bit sooner. But Julia, Gareth delved into some of the problems. Would you share Gareth's view on the problems? And I know, Julia, I hate to use this phrase, the coal face, but you're essentially on the ground working with end users. You're working with the intermediaries, the fee payers, the umbrellas, and in some cases the suppliers. What do you think the problems are, Julia? And would you have any, you know, tips or advice for organizations to help maybe get this right, even if it's post 6th of April? Essentially what I'm asking is, what can they do post this period to help their organizations on this journey?
Yeah, it's a difficult one at this stage, and you know, we posted on LinkedIn about this session today, and someone who I know well and is well known in this sector kind of replied to say, oh well, you know, if you haven't started getting ready, then it's too late. Well, it is, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. And you know, we'll go on to the soft landing a bit later, but I really wouldn't hold too much by that soft landing. And one of the problems that Gareth was, well, one of the things Gareth mentioned was HMRC's check employment status tax for tax tool. And one of the problems I wanted to mention is that yes, HMRC will stand by the result generated by that tool, but you have to input the information correctly. And as you probably know, the similar legislation came out in the public sector a few years ago, and there was a public sector body, NHS Digital, that did use the HMRC's tool, but apparently they didn't use it correctly, and they ended up with a £4.3 million bill owed to HMRC due to the fact that they didn't use the tool correctly. So yes, even HMRC's own tool is not foolproof. In terms of what I'm seeing is massively varied. Surprisingly, a lot of clients and businesses using contractors are not really talking to their contractors about what is about the off-payroll changes. And I say surprisingly because these businesses are, and you know, some of you are probably on this webinar today, you need to make that determination. Does this individual look more like an employee, or do they look like a genuine contractor in business on their own account? Now, some of the stuff about being in business on your own account and it being a business-to-business relationship, some of those factors you can only get answers to from talking to the contractors. Like, you know, sometimes whether they've got other clients and that sort of thing could be important. So I'm surprised that we are seeing contractors who are hearing nothing from their clients. And I guess part of the problem is, we said that it was supposed to come in last year. It didn't, because the pandemic then obviously took over. And, I guess that's been the main focus for a lot of businesses. So that's possibly why this is slipping off the radar. But it is absolutely essential, if you haven't started getting ready for these changes that come in next week, by the way, absolutely essential that you do. And, you need to be communicating with your contractors. So if you are doing stuff behind the scenes and you're not telling them what you're doing, you need to just tell them, because they're massively concerned. Are they suddenly going to be found inside IR35 and be paying tax as an employee with no benefits of being an employee? And I think that's an important point as well, that has already been made, to be honest. But yeah, there's all sorts of different things. I can keep going, but I I think that's probably enough for now.
Okay, Julia, and thanks so much for that practical practical look at things. But we are pleasantly surprised in a way with the number of queries from organizations just going, what the hell did we do? And I think, to both your points, Julia and Gareth, it has come along by stealth, because I think a lot of organizations were hoping that it would be deferred for another year, and they've really left it to the last possible week or last possible minute to get ready. But I think the message I've taken from you, Julia, is that there's hope, and the time to start, if you haven't started, is after this call or now, right? So yeah. Thank you very much for that, Julia and Gareth. So Gareth, just over to you on this one. So, and also Julia, I'd be keen to understand your views as well. What category of workers does IR35 really hit? So on our last webinar, there was a lot of discussion around whether sole traders should be in scope for IR35 determination. So Gareth, I suppose, what's the legal view? Obviously it's non-binding and all that, but what's the view on that? Should it only be PSCs, or should sole traders be lumped into this determination exercise?
Yeah, look, good question. And I know that some law firms are now saying that sole traders should. I'm not completely with them on that view, and I'll explain why, and I'll also sort of illustrate why I think they get there. This legislation is primarily aimed at PSCs, the single person corporate vehicle, the personal service company, i.e. the limited company, someone who has gone and bought a new co off the shelf, formally incorporated, one shareholder, one director, etc., etc. But even in the HMRC guidance in that, you will see them extending that in two ways. One, they're saying that when the end user makes the determination and analysis, there's an expectation that you pierce the corporate veil, which is rarely done in corporate law matters, but it is done in this situation where there's an expectation that the end user should, because what they're trying to establish is, in very simple analogy, and I heard an employment judge put it like this: if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then we all know what it is, and ignore what an entity might call itself. And that makes it very, very difficult for the end user, because does that mean you have to audit the entirety of your supplier network in terms of services, etc.? I'm stopping short at the moment in relation to sole traders, but I do think that partnerships are definitely caught in the guidance now, whereas initially they weren't. So I do think that it is not enough for us going through our supply chain and network to stop at any entity and discount it unless they have an LTD at the end of the invoice and name. We have to go a little bit beyond that. Okay. The reason why I think people are saying sole traders as well is partly because there is a lack of absolute clarity coming out from HMRC, partly because it's the most risk-averse approach to take, and it is the sort of the blanket approach. Just do everybody. You can't be criticised by HMRC if you've done everyone, but I do think that puts too much of a burden on entities based on the present guidelines.
Good stuff. And I suppose same question to you, Julia, but with an additional question, if I may. Should umbrella companies be part of that exercise as well as PSCs?
Okay, on the subject of sole traders, if if it was me who was a client who had plenty of time to get ready, I would be reviewing sole traders as well. It just makes sense to know that sole traders are genuinely self-employed, because otherwise you've got a financial risk if it, you know, of PAYE risk. So yeah, that I think might be the reason why there is some confusion out there. And I think if it, as I say, if it was me, I would look at them similarly. The tests are slightly different, by the way, but broadly the same. So it kind of makes sense to have a similar process for both types. In terms of kind of the status assessment itself, the responsibility for that lies with the end client. So that responsibility can't really be delegated. You can, of course, get advice from, there's lots of outsourced providers that you can get advice from, but you have to be confident in their processes and do your due diligence around who you select, etc. Because ultimately it's your responsibility, and you have to make that status determination, but by all means use whatever tools are available to you.
Thanks, Julia. And Julia, should workers that are PSCs but within an umbrella company framework, should they go through the SDS process through the end user as well?
Yeah, so anyone that is engaged by the end user is the end user's responsibility. There might be some confusion because umbrella companies will often employ the worker, which means that they are then outside of the scope of IR35 if they're employed. Now, now we're probably stepping ahead to one of the later points, actually, so I don't want to cause any confusion. But yes, anyone who is directly engaged, or who is engaged by the client, even if there is a supply chain there, is their responsibility.
Great. And Julia, just moving on to the next point, as I mentioned in the introduction to yourself, not only are you an advocate, but you actually make things happen, and you've been on the cusp of real change and real campaigning in relation to employment related matters in the UK, and consequently, I'm sure you've had lots of dealings with HMRC and government in that time. So I know it's an unfair question, but in your view, is the HMRC soft landing, is it to be believed, and do they normally follow through with what they tell us in the public?
To be honest with you, I think the belief their side behind it is genuine, but I think what we will see is different. And that sounds like a muddled answer, but what I mean is they are intending for it to be a soft landing. However, don't forget that if they have reason to believe that there is non-compliance, particularly deliberate non-compliance, they will take action. So anybody who is feeling comfortable because there's this apparent soft landing, shouldn't be feeling comfortable. You need to get processes in place. They won't come after you immediately. They won't be coming after you next week, but they will certainly be keeping an eye out for non-compliance. And having dealt with HMRC over a number of years, as you kind of mentioned, then I do think that the team responsible for it are genuine in wanting it to be a soft landing, and they want firms to be comfortable with it. So I think that if you can show that you have taken steps as opposed to blindly burying your head in the sand, I think they would be receptive to it. But that in itself is still a risk. So yeah, if it's me, I'm getting on with it. Well, I would have already done it, of course, but if you haven't, it just focus on it. You need to.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And Gareth, let me pose this question. It's an extension of the question that I've asked Julia there. So let's say, Big Bank B hasn't begun their IR35 journey, and they begin it on the 7th of April next week, right? And they've got 10,000 odd contractors that they need to put through the IR35 machine or status determination process and assessment process. So let's say 3 months from April, they're still engaged in that process, right? But they've got that course of dealing, if you like, that they've begun the process, they've put half those workers through that. In your view, and it's only your view, Gareth, would that give them any form of reasonable defense in the event of a HMRC audit, or would they look at the totality of what hasn't happened as opposed to what has happened on a proportional basis?
You had me at Big Bank B. Connor, right at the start. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not a believer in the soft landing from HMRC. I appreciate it, and I think Julie put it beautifully and very diplomatically whenever she said that HMRC, the team responsible, may feel that they are giving us a soft landing. But if you consider this, the approach of HMRC to related elements, prosecution, penalties, technical breaches, for example, in the National Minimum Wage Inspector and their offshoots, I would not be reliant in any way, shape, or form on a soft landing. HMRC themselves, this is some commentary on their own approach to this. So if the end client or end user has reached an accidental incorrect determination, there's two caveats straight away on IR35 status. HMRC will apply a soft landing to such mistakes for the first 12 months of implementation. However, will of course require the tax to be paid going forward, and it's more likely that it'll also be backdating for PAYE and NICs. So my concern with HMRC in this is that when the regime is up and running, the people that apply it at ground level and will do the assessments will approach this on a completely technical level, and they will make their determinations for us as regards penalties and classifications on technical grounds and technical grounds alone. They do not consider at assessment level equitable principles or basic fairness. So notwithstanding the narrative in and around this, I think the soft landing is more to do with the fact that there hasn't been enough guidance in this. The CEST tool is not efficient, and this legislation has been delayed as a consequence of COVID. I think those are more factors as to why there's to be a soft landing, as opposed to people interpreting this because it's difficult and complex and applying an accidental and incorrect determination. I think the soft landing is more context as opposed to content. And for those reasons, I think it is critically important, as Julia says as well, if you haven't started this already, got to get into this. That, I actually think, is how the soft landing is to be interpreted. There will be a period of time in which entities will be given some leeway in terms of comms, their own internal assessment, and then comms with the PSCs. But if we haven't started it at all, then I don't think you're going to unlock any of this softer approach that HMRC are talking about, Connor.
Good, Jim. Thanks, Gareth and Julia. And guys, would it be your opinion that the HMRC are likely to focus on what I would describe as the bigger beasts, the FTSE 100 or the FTSE 250 type size organizations? Is there any commentary that HMRC have given on that in terms of the companies that they might target in the first sweep, if you like?
I haven't seen any official commentary, but usually HMRC, when asked about this sort of thing, quote, "We will take a risk-based approach," and that's kind of what you tend to see coming from them. So thinking about it in that way, a risk-based approach, well, yes, those big companies are likely to have more contractors there, more people potentially who haven't acted compliantly with the new rules. And so, yeah, a risk-based approach to me would put those types of firms towards the top of the list. But I hasten to say, I don't actually know that. I don't know if Gareth has heard anything that I haven't.
No, I haven't, Julia. I'd go with that, absolutely. I think that's part of the themes to this. We just haven't heard enough from HMRC in relation to this, notwithstanding the hiatus of 2020 to 2021.
Okay, thanks, guys. So again, we're going to look at hypothetical big bank B, but I think there's some cases that I'm sure we're all familiar with in the UK news, and particularly the business news. So there's a number of commercial and investment banks that have essentially said, we will no longer engage PSC workers here within our organization, and therefore you will need to either be a PAYE worker on some sort of outsourced basis, an umbrella worker, I suppose similar principles apply, or come and work for us as a full-time employees. So I suppose my question, Gareth, I'll start with you if I may. Is that considered a blanket approach, or is that more of a policy decision, and therefore it's reasonable for that organization to insist upon that way of working?
I do think some organizations are adopting that approach. I don't think it's a terribly pragmatic one. It seems to be led by the boardroom, and it is a blanket determination at very high level. What that does is it very much constrains, one would think, the supplier network to that organization, and it actually may create an awful lot of operational difficulties further down the chain. I also am not a big fan of blanket approaches necessarily. I don't think it permits the nuances of the various industries to really operate and operate efficiently. And I think it's actually more of a knee-jerk to the uncertainties of this, as opposed to a really considered, thought-through view on how best to work with the changing market. I also think when you consider, gig economy, zero-hour contract workers, you consider all the legal issues into what is an employee, what is a worker, what is a truly independent sole trader. Look at the case law with Uber, delivery, all of those things over the last few years. The legislation is way behind the case law. There's a whole industry that's built up around status, and this is no different to that. So consequently, any blanket determination coming down from an eye seems to me to be more a knee-jerk to the lack of clarity, as opposed to a properly considered and sort of creative solution. So those are my initial views on it. Happy to feed in anything more and to pass to Julia.
Yes, thanks. And I'll come back to you, Gareth. I have a follow-up question, but Julia, I can't wait to hear what you've got to say on this matter.
Well, yeah, so it's very interesting, isn't it? I can quite see why firms are making these policy decisions. I don't quite agree that these are blanket approaches, because they're just changing their supply chain. So these firms they can make these decisions at any time. And the blanket approaches we've seen before are when whole roles, where everyone in a particular role is deemed inside IR35, and they still engage them. But what we're seeing is kind of one step above that. They're not even being considered for IR35. They're just deciding, no, we don't want to engage contractors in this way. So therefore, by taking that step a level above, they don't need to consider IR35 status or the off payroll rules, because that is kind of what they're doing. They're circumventing that potential risk, but also by doing that, they can't be accused of not taking reasonable care, because there's no risk there in how they're engaging those individuals. So there is no reasonable care to be taken if they've decided we will only engage them via PAYE. Now, I'm absolutely not saying that's the right way to do it. I completely disagree with it. As the person here kind of representing things from the contractor perspective, it is the wrong way to do it. And we have seen some clients who kind of had to go back on their policy decision because the individual contractors won't necessarily allow themselves to be engaged via PAYE, and they'll go to competitors who are getting on board with the off payroll process and the stuff involved with it. So yeah, I've answered a few different things there and gone into reasonable care. Sorry about that.
Well, it's good, Julia. And I think with those policy decisions that we've all mentioned, simply saying, well, we no longer engage or work with IR35, work with PSC workers, you got to go through this route, and that's a policy decision. And there's a terrible and beautiful simplicity to that approach, right? I don't agree with it either, but sitting in big boardroom B, I can understand that pragmatic rationale and logic that they would deploy to go down that route. But I suppose my question now goes back to that topic and goes to you, Gareth. Would those workers, let's say they're PSCs, would they have any right of reply or remedy to that? Because I know in the IR35 world, they would obviously have the right of appeal once they get their status determination issued to them, and we understand the process around that, and we might look at that briefly in a few moments. But, you know, could those workers en masse group together and say, well, hang on a second, we're actually PSCs and we want to be engaged as such, or is that just a stretch too far?
No, it isn't a stretch too far. And I think, you know, this is whenever you boil this down to the actual reality. If you are a PSC, and notwithstanding that you may have filed your own tax returns and you have made a statement or ticked a box with your accountant year on year and filed it with HMRC in relation to your status, there is nothing to stop you as an individual bringing a claim, both in the employment tribunal as well as in the High Court, County Court, simultaneously, depending on how the claim is pitched. A couple of things in that. Where a blanket decision comes down from on high and says your status must change, or we're no longer going to contract with you, it is that's going to kick off so many different responses for the individual. Some may not care. Some may say, well, actually, this is my primary source of income. I have to fight. And if they have to fight, what they're actually going to do is go and see a solicitor. And a solicitor, the vast majority of solicitors that I know on this, and I've talked to some, and I've begun to see it as well, because they do not know the nuts and bolts of the legislation, and because there are grey areas, as we've said before, between HMRC's assessment of what the individual might be and what the classic historic legal issues are in relation to status, then what they are actually going to do is to advise the shotgun approach. And that is issue as against absolutely everybody, put in 3 or 4 potential respondents on the claim, whether that's in the employment tribunal, seeking a determination as to status, quite apart from compensation, which follows, as well as issuing in the High Court, County Court for compensation, breach of contract. The individual end user, PSC, whatever, will not care whether or not a judge at a particular point says, actually, you know what, you've got this wrong. You should only have issued in one form, not the other. And here's the rationale. Because at that point, they will probably have done one of 2 things. They will either have already settled the matter on a commercial basis, in which case the litigation falls away, so they've achieved what they need, or B, they will have a slightly different alternative proposed to them from the entity, again to avoid litigation, because with passage of time there will be additional clarity. So the fear here is that in the vacuum of absolute clarity between financial tax assessment of status versus employment, where there is litigation, the individual PSC will be advised to shotgun it and litigate against absolutely everyone and let a judge make a determination as to unpicking the legislation. That's the reality.
Interesting. So potentially we could see some class actions ahead. I know we don't have crystal balls, but if organizations go down this route, fascinating stuff, I have to say. And Julie, I know we touched briefly on reasonable care there. In your view, what is reasonable care, and what should organizations do when they're assessing workers for the purposes of whether they're inside or outside IR35?
Gosh, yeah. So I don't know if Gareth knows if there's a statutory definition of reasonable care. If there is, I'll let Gareth talk to that, if that's okay. But yeah, reasonable care is, for me, my nirvana of reasonable care would be to involve as many different perspectives on reaching that status determination as you can. Now, that it could be a very, very big ask, particularly for big organizations, because what I'm really saying is you need to be considering the working practices. So you might need to involve the individual that kind of that they report to within your organization to get a good overview of that. You want to involve the contractor themselves. You need to be taking kind of a look from your organization's perspective. And And so you need to look at as many different factors as possible and take an overview of what is happening. And certainly reasonable care would not be just changing contracts and just making those updates on paper, because actually if it goes to a tribunal, it is they will look at everything en masse, and if that contract is found to not reflect working practices, then they would potentially disregard it. So yeah, it's a tough question, and as I say, I don't know if Gareth knows more about the legal side of what reasonable care looks like, but that's kind of what I would expect to see from a practical basis.
Thanks, Julie.
Right. How long have you got? How long have you got to talk about reasonableness? Do you know what? Reasonableness is something that undergrads learn and struggle with in year one. They pass an exam on it at undergrad, but they struggle with it for the remainder of their career, if they're honest, because it is the most sort of esoteric piece of guidance you'll ever get in through the court system. Actually, Julia nails it when she said the nirvana is to try and bring in as many kinds of support into the decision-making process, illustrating your decision-making process. This is what reasonableness is all about. In the context of IR35, it starts with every organization auditing their supplier network. I use the phraseology supplier network. It's going to be different in every organization, but cast the net wide. See who you have been paying through P&L, exceptional items, doesn't really matter, in the last 12, 24 months. It starts with that. And from that very wide net, reasonableness requires that you sift that using an unusual combination of the tools that are already out there, HMRC guidance, common sense, okay? And in reality, once you begin to sift, you also use the tools. As I say, we have the status determination assessment. Within that, there are a number of controls and methods and guidance. We'll talk to that in just a moment. But whatever you do with that, there is this CEST tool that we've talked about. Use it. You don't have to necessarily show that use to anyone. You can use it as your first sort of source to help sift. For example, you can look at your supplier network, and even if it appears to be a limited company with 5 to 10 employees already, you're beginning to think, well, is that a personal service company? Probably not. There is a lot of assistance you can do to begin to reduce. The legal tests that are really important, that are mirrored to a degree in the CEST tool, but come through loud and clear in any bespoke drafted status determination assessment, deal with, and I'll major in these in order of significance, personal service versus right of substitution. If there is a right of substitution and it is meaningful and has been applied through the course of the contract, that is one of the single biggest indicators for IR35 disapplication. Mutuality of obligation, another legal term, but basically, boiling that down, it's an obligation on the part of the worker to provide his or her worker skill, and then an obligation on the engager or the end user to actually pay the worker for that service. Control is of itself opens up 5 or 6 different legal tests, but fundamentally, control is to be assessed as a walk like a duck, quack like a duck, then it is a duck. Do we control the relationship? Do we discipline? Do we decide our working hours, start time, finish time, method of work, etc., etc., etc.? Consider what that actually looks like. The provision of own equipment versus provision of our equipment, PC, telephone, uniform, office space, whatever the industry might look like, have a think, what is actually the situation here, and should someone be properly considered as an employee worker versus someone who actually is a truly independent subcontractor who can come and go as they please. They do a particular function and then they go. If we pay by the hour, or we have permanency in a sense in relation to the contract in terms of length of time, then again that looks more like, well, that looks much more like the employer type relationship, as opposed to we are ringing up XYZ, they need to come in, perform a function, complete a task, go. the price is per task as opposed to per working or hourly rates, etc. So there's so much in that. Are the individuals part and parcel of the organization? And in these categories, we're veering into the CEST tool and the questions and the status determination. Who has the right to terminate? Is there financial risk or opportunity to profit for the individual, etc.? Those are the kinds of things, the tests you need to be considering. And whenever we're running this process, use all the knowledge out there, make a bespoke status determination assessment for your organization, run it through, as Julia says, speak to the individual, the contractor, get their input to make sure that the information we actually populate the CEST tool with is correct. Issue our provisional determination. That's harder with passage of time now because we're so close, but issue our provisional determination, get them to comment, get them or their accountant stroke auditor to report back and give us some information which may well help assist us make a reasonable decision. Of course, give people the right of appeal, see what comes back in the appeal, if anything, and then apply. That is your reasonableness in terms of approach, using this, staying within the statutory scheme, follow the HMRC guidance as far as it is, and engage in a two-way piece of correspondence using all those tools combined. That's really, to my mind, what reasonable care is, and will in turn unlock, to the extent that there is one, a soft landing from HMRC.
Yeah, I tell you, Gareth and Julia, I think for those listening, our audience, all the things that you've both said will be of such great help to them if they haven't begun this journey. And although you've said a lot, both of you, in relation to that question, I think the tips and advice and opinion that you've given would be a really good structure for anyone to follow. So hopefully the audience find that helpful. Julia, next question over to you. And I know this is a particular area of experience for you, but what opportunities can organizations, I suppose, gain from utilizing umbrella companies on their IR35 journey?
Yeah, so umbrella companies are not new to the labour market, actually. They've been around for about 20 or so years. And what an umbrella company does is usually they will employ the individual worker, and that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. And by employing them, then that individual has all employment rights and benefits, and also crucially they're paid via payroll. Now, some recruitment agencies who would be a fee payer in this world of off payroll for anyone that's determined inside IR35, for some of those recruitment agencies, payrolling contractors en masse is very, very difficult, and they don't necessarily have the resources. And this is where umbrellas can come in, because obviously a large part of employing the contractor is in relation to paying them, and it is a very important part of any employment relationship. So sometimes recruitment agencies will have a preferred supplier list of umbrellas that they will work with to fulfill that part of the supply chain. So the opportunities are, in terms of payroll is outsourced, employment risk is outsourced as well, because if they are working with umbrellas that do employ them, because then the buck stops with that umbrella. So it's a good way of outsourcing risk. There are the major kind of bone of contention, I think you said earlier, Connor, that umbrellas don't always have a good press. The major bone of contention with umbrellas is that people feel that that umbrellas are deducting employers' national insurance from the contractor's income. Now, they aren't. The umbrella can only use the money that they receive from the recruitment agency or from the client. And from that is not the contractor's income. This is where it falls down. That is the income to the umbrella. And from that, they have to pay all those overheads of employment, including employers' national insurance. Now, when the rate for that individual contractor has not been uplifted to take account of those employment overheads, it will feel to them that they are paying for the honour of being employed by an umbrella, for the honour of being inside IR35, which they may not agree with, and that is where a lot of the bad press comes in. And so recruitment agencies need to be really careful about how they're advertising inside IR35 roles. And if they're advertising them on kind of a gross rate, then that can very easily be misunderstood by the individual as being their pay rate. And this is where key information documents also come in. If you're a recruitment agency listening to this, you should know what a key information document is, because you've been legally obliged to give them to your workers for the last year. Yeah, I could go on, but I don't want to bore everyone with all this stuff. But there's big opportunities there, but you need to make sure that you are working with umbrellas that are compliant and that are going to do what they should be doing. And I would, if I was a client, I would look to my recruitment agency to advise on that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's one. You made some great points there. The one that landed with me, Julia, is that you're essentially outsourcing risk, right? And of course, you don't want that risk to be a boomerang, right? So to your point, it's best to work with those that are FCSA accredited and regulated. We've got a number of questions here. Hopefully, we'll get to all of them. But if I may, Gareth, we're going to go with you for this one. It's from Ruth Cunningham, HRBP. Ruth, good afternoon. Thank you for joining. Ruth's question, Gareth, is in the chat there. And what Ruth is saying is that she's not entirely clear on what steps to take with companies who provide services for your company, but you're 100% sure their staff or employees who pay their taxes, PAYE taxes. Do we, as in Ruth's company, need to get a letter confirming this or update SLAs? What's your view on the question, Gareth? It's only your view.
Oh, no, sure, no problem. 2 or 3 elements to that. The companies who provide the service as well, is that an agency? Is that partially answered by what Julia's just said in relation to umbrellas, or is it just a third-party company who we are using and we know that they have employees? There's a clue there in the sense that they have staff, plural. So the more staff they have, in one sense, the less likely they're going to be a PSC in any event themselves. So they were not less concerned about IR35. If it's an umbrella stroke agency, slightly different. So we'll have to consider that. The other aspect that I want, and by the way, the answer to that is by getting a proper understanding of the actual nature of the corporate, the service provision, etc. But the other piece to this, and I think this is important, is do we need to get a letter confirming this? I think that's really helpful. If there's any kind of concern whatsoever, that's part of what we talked about reasonableness in terms of the correspondence, provisional determinations, right to the third party and see what they come back with and say, because that might just give us another argument to keep in the back pocket with HMRC should they ever come knocking in terms of how we got to where we did. Yeah. And the final piece is, can we update an SLA or service level agreement or any other form of legal document which deals with this? That's a really interesting question. I'd urge a good degree of caution with that. Warranties, indemnities, statements in relation to where liability falls, etc. You can contract what you like in one sense between 2 corporate entities. Whether that actually stands up to scrutiny before a court, entirely different matter. So updating an SLA as a sort of a sleeping policeman, and it makes a point, and it may work as a deterrent factor in relation to subsequent commercial negotiations. Will it stand up to scrutiny before a judge in and of its own right? Probably not. Almost certainly not if it's directly contrary to underlying UK legislation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Gareth. And I suppose, let's say it's Accenture or a large consulting organization similar to Accenture providing the service here. I think you'd need to look at the nature of the agreement that you hold with them, and also just get that letter of comfort from them, almost to say that those workers are tax compliant and PAYE workers providing the service. Question to you, Julia, from Jane McCormick. Welcome, Jane. Thank you for your question. Jane's question, Julia, and Gareth, if you want to take this after Julia, is we have service providers who provide engineers who are either contracted to our service provider via umbrella companies or are outside IR35 and full-time employees. Who's obliged in this instance to generate the SDS? So I think maybe there's a couple of steps that might be missing there, Julia, but perhaps you'd care to answer based on the question.
Yeah, so I think my understanding from the question is that it's an outsourced service that they're talking about. And so if the workers are working for an outsourced service, I don't know, let's say you're outsourcing all of your IT to an IT company, the worker's status is the responsibility of that IT company, not you, the end client there. In that scenario, if it is indeed an outsourced service, I'm slightly nervous in case I've misunderstood the circumstances there, though. So yeah, but that would be my answer. And whether that service provider will then need to be comfortable with their status, and that service provider, depending on their size, might be outside the scope of off-payroll changes anyway, but that's a whole other subject. But if they are small as according to the Companies Act, then they would be outside the scope of off-payroll.
Julia, I think Jane's come back there. I think there's a bit more clarity to her question. I think she's referring to umbrella companies. So Jane, if we understand this correctly, you have service providers who provide engineers. The engineers are paid by umbrella companies. And essentially what you're asking, Jane, is it your responsibility as the end user to assess those workers and issue the SDS? Is that correct, Jane? If you can just hit yes or no.
Assuming that is correct, and it is,
we're on the money. Great stuff, Jane.
Sorry, Jane, I didn't fully understand the question. So yeah, if those individuals are employed by that umbrella company, then there is no status to be considered. If you occasionally engage them and they're working through their limited company, that is when the status needs to be determined, and that would be your responsibility. But generally, an umbrella company will employ the worker. Therefore, that is partly why they're using them as a good opportunity, because if they are employing them, then there's no need to consider their IR35 status.
Thanks, Julia. And Julia, I might just stay with you. I think this leads on to what we were discussing earlier about potential rates not being advertised correctly from recruitment providers or other intermediaries. And we have a question here from Dan. Dan, again, our advice here isn't binding. We're here just to give our opinion. More than anything, but Dan's question is, he contracts via his limited business with a fair amount of regular monthly business expenses. How do I claim my legitimate tax deductible expenses if businesses are putting rules available to me inside IR35? If hiring parties want to put rules inside IR35, I can see and have seen rates rocket by hundreds of pounds. So I don't understand the second question, Dan, but I think I get the first part of your question. Julia, any thoughts in relation to that?
Yeah, so I think I understand what Dan's asking. What you need to do, if you can, Dan, is keep your limited company going, and you need to try and have someone, if you're inside IR35, try and have them pay you net into your limited company. So I'm talking about deemed payment model here, which is a different thing to most of the conversation that we've had. But there are, it is possible. It might just be easier actually if I have a conversation with Dan offline, because I think it might just confuse a lot of the conversation so far today. But basically, if you are going into an employed solution such as an umbrella, then it might be possible there as well. But there's a few complications. I'd rather take it offline if that's okay.
Absolutely, Julia and Gareth. Guys, if I could just allocate just 1 to 2 sentences on our last point, because I'm conscious we've went over time. Thanks to our audience for staying on the line, and to you, Gareth, and of course, Julia. Very simply, Julia, is statement of work a good tool for moving workers outside IR35? Is it a solution, let's caveat this, of sorts, or is it a risk?
Well, there's a lot of debate in the sector on it. It can be a solution, but it fundamentally changes the way a lot of businesses do engage contractors. So a lot of businesses engage contractors on a time basis. So they pay them X amount of hours for X amount of work done. Now, a statement of work changes that and is payable on deliverables. And so, yes, in theory, that then makes it a different type of relationship, and it can, in theory, take us outside the scope of payroll, but it is actually a lot more detailed, and it takes quite a bit of legal discussion at the outset, project planning, etc. And
Julia, I think if we could mute Jay Manzanilo's line. There we go. Thank you. Whoever's muted, thank you very much. Sorry, Julia, please continue. I do apologize.
It's all right. I have pretty much finished. I was just really saying it could work, but it takes a lot of time to get it set up in that way, and it completely changes the way of working. What we are seeing a little bit of is people saying it's kind of the magic bullet, silver bullet rather. It isn't often, and it might not be worth all the effort to get the legal stuff in place beforehand.
Thanks, Julia. Gareth, last word to you on this, if you care to answer it, of course.
No, I that totally agree with everything as Julia said. I'm very happy with that. Nothing more to add.
Great stuff. Well, I think we'll bring today's webinar to a close. So Gareth and Julia, thanks so much for your time today, for the expert opinion that you've given here. We really appreciate it. Some really top tips. And I just wanted to thank our audience for sticking with us during this masterclass series. So again, thanks to your audience, but thanks in particular to Julia and Gareth. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.